Well, today marks World Rare Disease Day. It also marks 1 year since the Firefly Fund was officially established, which sheds a light on a rare genetic neurodegenerative disease. It's a disease that has changed the lives of an Austin family and given them a mission. Sisters Belle and Abby are often in their playroom, surrounded by sensory objects.
Okay, you want the pink sand.
Belle is this enormous ball of love who loves everybody.
Yeah.
And 3-year-old Abby is outgoing and eager to play.
She's very spirited and
But the sweetest child ever.
The girls spent a lot of time together at home and in doctor's offices. Less than 2 years ago, both were diagnosed with Niemann-Pick type C1, a rare neurodegenerative disease with no cure.
I think we struggle with what to say all the time. And
we want to meet them where they are for their age. And we don't want to scare them. And we don't want to use labels.
Belle was diagnosed after she started showing developmental delays at age 5. Learning the disease is genetic, parents Chris and Pam tested Abby and were crushed again when she also tested positive.
Abby is starting to ask questions. She's not showing any signs of cognitive impairment that we've been able to see, or that the doctors have been able to see. So she's asking a lot of questions about why are we going to the hospital every other week, and Mommy, I don't want to get a procedure.
Within hours of Belle's diagnosis, the Andrews found out about a clinical trial. Both girls have been a part of that trial ever since, and at this point, Abby hasn't shown any symptoms. The Andrews say Belle struggles with her gait and her speech. She's in 7 therapies a week, but they are hopeful for both girls' futures.
in rare disease, you have to be very proactive. You have to be in the fight. If we don't raise the money for the research, we can't count on other people to do it. And we knew immediately, I mean, within hours of being diagnosed, that we were going headfirst into the fight, and we were going to do everything we possibly could to save our children.
They quickly established the Firefly Fund, a nonprofit working to raise awareness of the disease. The foundation currently funds research at 4 universities, including the University of Texas. The Andrews are fighting for newborn testing. Their dream is that one day a doctor will deliver this life-changing news to parents.
He's going to stand in front of them and he's going to say, you know, because of newborn screening, we've discovered that your child has Niemann-Pick, but it's okay, we have a cure. And that's the day that Pam and I are fighting for. That's the day that we want to see happen in the near future.
We feel it's our responsibility.
It's our responsibility
to make a difference for not just our kids, but for all the children.
And the Andrews would like to see NPC1 added to the federal list of recommended screenings for newborns. They encourage people to join the fight and help shed a light on this disease. You can find out more at Firefly Fund.
Hi, y'all. It's my job and pleasure to welcome everybody here tonight. It's also my job to introduce our MC, particularly to the people from out of town or out of state who may not know him. I'm going to take you back to another century. In 1984, I was president of the Young Lawyers Association of Texas. I was actually young at the time. And it was our custom among the leadership, we took the baby lawyers under our wing to train them in leadership and all that stuff, how they'd be as grown-up lawyers. Well, Kirk Watson was one of those baby lawyers we took under our wing, and I think we did a pretty good job. Frankly, he outshone all of us, whose names are nothing. And most of you know, Kirk was the mayor of Austin when Austin Bergstrom Airport opened. Then he ran for and won Texas Senate race in Central Texas in 2007. Then he started figuring out what he was going to do while he was senator. One of the things he did was come out with 10 reasons or 10 things that Central Texas should do in 2011 in their medical field. One of the reasons he was particularly interested in the medical field is he's a proud survivor of testicular cancer, twice, I think. Anyway, he did a pretty good job on that. This 2011, he had a 10-point checklist. Since that time, I don't think everything's been checked off, but number 1 was create a medical school here, done. Number 2 was create a hospital associated with the medical school here, done. Number 3 was to have a brain health initiative done, and the $100 million from the Mulva Foundation has helped that initiative. It's my very great pleasure and honor to welcome my friend Kirk Watson.
Well, I appreciate that, Barry. That's she's right. We've known each other all the way in the last century, and a long time ago we were both young. I was right. I was telling the Gullahorns a minute ago that Barry and I first met back in 1984, and that was my memory, and so she has just confirmed that. You know, the truth of the matter is, I've known Barry and her late husband, and we've been friends for that whole length of time. And I'm going to say a few words. For those of y'all that didn't know Mike Crowley, I'm going to tell you, he was a wonderful, he was a great guy. He was something special. He was, as you might expect, very highly regarded by his peers as a lawyer. He was a trusted advisor to many of the lawyers in the state. His friends, we all enjoyed him so much because, well, for among other reasons, he was funny as hell. He was always enjoyable to be around. And he, you know, it's interesting as I stand here now, he created a program at the State Bar that has really stood the test of time and assisted lawyers and people that were in real need. And the ripple effect of his work, well, the truth of the matter is, who knows how many lives he touched and how many lives are still touched today because of what he did, and that's years after he's passed. I bring him up in part to point out that of course, he's remembered and he's missed by Barry and their 5 children, and all of those children are here tonight, and I want to introduce them. Dr. Lisa Connell Crowley is here. I'll have you stand up. Go ahead and stand up now. I'd like you to stand up now. Lisa, yeah. Of course, Pam Crowley Andrews, Jessica Crowley Hershey, Leslie Crowley, and Sean Crowley. Y'all stand up. Let's. You know, and we're also joined here tonight by one of Mike's 5 brothers, Tim Crowley. Oh, Debbie's here? Okay, I'm sorry. Debbie, would you stand up? Let us recognize you. There you are. Thank you. So, you know, Barry's already told you that we go way back, and I'll tell you one of the cool parts, if there is a cool part to getting older, one of the cool parts of getting older with friends that you've known a million years like we've known each other is getting to know and watch their children grow up. And sometimes you end up being friends with their children. And this has certainly been the case for Liz and me with Barry and Mike's daughter Pam and her husband Chris. So I do that all to tell you how pleased I am I get to be part of this tonight and get to be your MC. And before we go any further, I want to point out that, by the way, the Boutique Educational Services, Lauren Bajwa, I hope I pronounced that right, and the law offices of Becky Beaver are underwriting our dinner tonight. So let's say thank you to them for doing that. So as was pointed out in the video, tonight we are here to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of the Firefly Fund. It's not that easy to say, is it? And I talk for a living, so the Firefly Fund. And as was pointed out in the video, today is World Rare Disease Day. So a year ago, at the inaugural event of this fund, Mayor Adler presented a proclamation declaring World Rare Disease Day in Austin in honor of the Firefly Fund. And as you know from the video, and you wouldn't be here if you didn't already know, the fund was inspired by Belle and Abby Andrews' diagnosis of Niemann-Pick type C1, or what sometimes is referred to as NPC1 or NPC. And the video pointed out it's a rare, genetic, neurodegenerative, progressive, and ultimately fatal disease. It's sometimes referred to as childhood Alzheimer's. Now, I've heard Pam and Chris say that they believe very strongly that there's no question, and they are now absolutely clear on what their life calling is. While it's enormously challenging and it's very painful, they believe that they have been called to do everything in their power to make an impact and a difference in the lives of children that are affected by NPC. And there's no one in this room that's a parent or a grandparent that doesn't understand the depth of these parents' love and have seen it in action. Bell began the process of genetic testing in 2015, and after what can only be described as a very long diagnostic odyssey, she and her baby sister, as you know, were both diagnosed with NPC. It was a few months after Bell and Abby's diagnosis that Pam and Chris, Barry, and I had coffee. And we talked about what it would take. What is needed? How do you go about making a significant impact, not only in the lives, as you heard them say, of Bell and Abby, but the lives of all children that are affected with NPC around the world? And we talked about their desire to create a foundation and the tremendous efforts that it would take and the difference that their foundation could make if things went the way they wanted it to go. And there's not anybody in this room that hadn't watched and admired the rollout of the Firefly Fund. Its mission is to fund and support the research and education necessary to accelerate a cure for neurodegenerative genetic diseases that affect children and currently have no cure. Well, folks, I'm going to tell you that the accomplishments of the Firefly Fund this past year have been remarkable, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. The fact that Pam and Chris have accepted such a responsibility and they take the kind of action that they've taken in such a short order is really a statement and a testament to their determination, their dedication, their discipline, and of course their love for their daughters. And I know that you all are as inspired as I am by the fact that they do this. You know, it's at that same coffee that we talked about how our community also had something different that hadn't existed. It wasn't here just a few years ago that could potentially make a real difference in people's lives. We had a medical school at the University of Texas at Austin, something that we'd wanted and needed for, I don't know, let's say like over a century. And that thing was now here, just as this family was looking to the future and trying to figure out what that future was going to hold. And I'll just say that I'm very proud that the University of Texas Dell Medical School is living up to this community's dreams when this community voted to help create it. It's redefining the medical aid, the hospital care, and the health system in our hometown. An example, which has been mentioned, is the mobile clinic for neurosciences. That was established as an innovative neurology clinic combining state-of-the-art neuroscience research and advanced clinical operations. It's going to be a remarkable catalyst for positive treatment on diseases like Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, stroke, and bipolar disorder. And as we move forward on what I have been calling the MD Anderson for the brain at the current Austin State Hospital site, we keep building from scratch at the UT Dell Medical School, which carries, because it's new, because it's built from the ground up, it carries no legacy programs and no historical baggage. So it can do things and take on the impossible situations and start making them look possible. And it can react to things, and that's important. Part of the fact that this community played a role in creating it means that we have a medical school that cares about the community. It's different in that regard, and you're going to hear me give an example in just a second. So I want to say thank you. I know we have doctors and staff from the medical school that are here with us tonight, and if you could just raise your hand or stand up so we can say thank you to you as well. Yeah, back there. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I've never known a doctor to do that, but I guess that happens from time to time. So here's the thing. We had the creation of the UT Dell Medical School. the Mulva Clinic for the Neurosciences, and there was, at the same time, there was ongoing a very complex clinical trial that was embraced by the Dell Children's Medical Center to treat those that were affected by NPC with a research medication that is referred to as VTS 270. Right, everybody remember that. VTS 270. In the span of 12 months, listen to this, Dell Children's has become the second largest trial site in the world. And the phase 3 clinical trial in Austin is being led by Dr. James Gibson. Dr. Gibson is here? Yeah. Dr. Gibson, where are you? There you are. Part of the reason I want to call him out is what I was just saying a minute ago about this community's involvement in its medical school. The community helped create the medical school, and we have a medical school that then cares about the community. So in a situation like we have, doctors like Dr. Gibson and others are able to react and help our community. So I really appreciate the role you play. So in accordance with their mission, the Firefly Fund, why'd you pick me to do this? Yeah, okay. You know, I read this several times and it never came out bad. The fund, hereinafter known as the fund, has created a medical research initiative called Join the Flight, and is collaborating with other NPC charitable family foundations around the country to fund medical research at 4 academic institutions. Washington University at St. Louis, the Ori Lab, and we'll hear more later. UPenn, at University of Pennsylvania, the VEET Lab, Albert Einstein College of Medicine, the Walkley Lab, and now a partnership between the fund and the Canadian chapter of the National NPC Foundation, jointly funding Dr. Steve Martin's lab at the University of Texas. And I know Dr. Martin is here. There he is. Doctor? So these academic institutions are working together along with the NIH, the National Center for Advancing Translational Science, and a collaboration of NPC family charitable foundations across the United States. In addition to the fund's work to raise money to support this medical research, it's also initiated and it's leading a multi-stakeholder coalition with the sole purpose of building and implementing a roadmap for adding NPC to newborn screen lists at the federal and the state level. Additionally, it's responding to calls from medical centers around the country to provide funding to assist in treating children on the compassionate use of VTS 270. Those are the children that weren't eligible for the trial, like Abby. All of these efforts have been made possible because of the support and the generosity of each and every person in this room, as well as thousands of individuals that aren't here tonight. And I'm just going to say it, Pam, your dad would be very proud. And Chris, I know that you lost your father to Alzheimer's just a month ago, and I have no doubt that he'd be proud too. We're very pleased to have part of your family here with you tonight. Your brother is here. Did your mother, was she able to make it? Okay. Well, Brian, would you, the brother, please stand up and let us recognize you for supporting your brother this year. So tonight we're going to get to hear from a few scientists working on the medical research on behalf of the fund, and we'll also hear about the Newborn Screening Coalition that I mentioned. But I want to take a moment and I want to introduce the co-founders of the Firefly Fund, as well as the board of directors of that fund that are with us here tonight. Now look, you've heard us, we've all mentioned, and I'm guessing that there's nobody in the room that doesn't know Pam and Chris. They're well known to you by now. But they're the co-founders of this wonderful fund. Pam is a businesswoman focusing on strategic initiatives and business development for an international consulting firm. She's also a philanthropist and a former state public health official. Passionately, she leads the efforts of this fund and all the various things that we've talked about. But most importantly, and it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it, she's the mother of Belle and Abby Andrews. Chris is an attorney at Amherst Holdings, and he's also a philanthropist by day. And by night, he's a very avid medical researcher and citizen scientist. Most importantly, he's the father of Belle and Abby. And of course, we'll have them say a few words there later in the evening. There's a board of directors of this fund that's doing so much good work, and I want to introduce each of the board members, and then I ask them to stand collectively after I've introduced each of them. Mary Ben Ramsey is the president of the board. Folks from Austin all know Mary Ben. Mary Ben has served on more than 25 boards of nonprofit organizations around the world. She is one of the people that people go to for advice on how best to do philanthropic work. She's the founder and principal of Ramsey Philanthropy and Mary Ben Ramsey Law. Of course, you've heard from Barry. Barry is an attorney in Austin. She's been practicing here since 1974, which explains why I was the young person she was taking under her wing. Yeah, there you go. Her career has encompassed a broad, a deep, and a highly recognized range of professional experiences. Her interests include, of course, her 5 grown children, their spouses, and importantly, being what they call grandberry to her 9 grandchildren. And of course, now her newest passion is helping to find a cure for NPC. Mary Ann Dwight is here with us. Mary Ann is the general counsel at the Texas Safekeeping Trust, where she's worked on issues related to health care, housing, financial transactions, and creating financing mechanisms to support a variety of projects. She sits on several foundation boards and is the founding board member of this fund. Is a founding board member. We're joined by Dr. Augustine Park. Dr. Park is a partner with the Anesthesia Partners of Texas and the chief of pediatric cardiac anesthesiology at Dell Children's, where he also serves on the clinical trial team that's administering the medication I've referred to, VTS 270, to the NPC children. He's a co-chair of the fund's scientific advisory board. Dr. Amy White is here. It could be said that Dr. White saved Belle's life, and certainly Abby's. As Belle and Abby's pediatrician, she was the one that recommended they have genetic testing, which led to their diagnoses. Dr. White moved to Austin in 2004. She's practiced primary care pediatrics and urgent care medicine in Austin ever since then. She currently practices pediatrics at Southwest Pediatric Associates in Austin. Dr. Lisa Cannell Crowley. Dr. Cannell Crowley has worked in the biotechnology industry for more than 15 years and is a recognized expert in the development of recombinant protein therapeutics with an emphasis on the purification process development and the viral clearance. Now, I've been on this diet. I think that's what's doing this. Because I'm not drinking. Dr. Cannell Crowley is currently head of the purification process design at Just Biotherapeutics in Seattle, Washington, a startup with a mission to make affordable protein therapies by dramatically lowering the cost of development and manufacturing. She is Pam's big sister and has become a trusted advisor to the NPC community as a whole. Additionally, she's the co-chair of the Scientific Advisory Board along with Dr. Park. Jack Gullahorn is a member of the Firefly Fund's advisory board, and let's just say he was instrumental, if not one of the key reasons that the clinical trial for VTS 270 is up and running in Austin, Texas. Jack has been involved in medical issues in our community for a long time, not one of those people that is always out front on them, but he is someone that if something good is going on with some of the things in our community, there might be a way to figure out a way that Jack was somehow involved in that. He's kind of like the Kevin Bacon of some good things happening in the community.
More like
but, yeah, there you go. Well, I was going with the 6 degrees of separation. He's an Austin attorney and lobbyist from 2002 to 2015. He founded and then served as general counsel and president of the Professional Advocacy Association of Texas, which is the only professional trade association for the Texas lobby community. He now, I was talking to him a minute ago, we've known each other a long time, but I was talking to him a minute ago about what he's up to, and most of the time he is consulting in the area of ethics, which is a fertile ground for both lobbyists and lawyers. Truth of the matter is, we have some very impressive people doing some very important work on behalf of the Firefly Fund. I'd like for you all to stand up so we can say thank you. Now, we're going to hear from Dr. Daniel Orey. who you heard me mention just a moment ago. He's with Washington University at St. Louis, and he's going to talk to us about some of the medical research that he's doing on behalf of the Firefly Fund and in collaboration with the Martin Lab at the University of Texas. Dan's been a scientific leader in the NPC community for over 20 years, and his lab has made fundamental contributions to better understanding of NPC. His contributions to NPC disease research have been recognized by the receipt of the Perseverance Award by the National Niemann-Pick Disease Foundation and the Champion of Hope Award from Global Genes. He graduated from Harvard College and Harvard Medical School, which we've heard of. He was trained at the Whitehead Institute at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and he joined the faculty at Washington University, St. Louis in 1995. Here's Dr. Ori. I'm going to let you take care of that.
Thank you. Good. I want to thank Kirk for that very generous introduction. I think my role here tonight is to give you an update as to what Firefly has been doing in terms of the research and be able to tell you about some of the exciting developments in the research area. As Kirk mentioned, I've been involved in NPC research for over 20 years. And in that span, I've been involved in thinking about how the disease develops, thinking about the molecular basis of the disease. I've been involved as well in developing new diagnostics. Some of the diagnostics that we developed in our laboratory are now the worldwide standard for how we diagnose the disease. But I've also been involved as well in the therapeutics, initially doing what we call translational work from preclinical models to eventually developing clinical models. And together with a whole group of people, a large team, including Denny Porter at the NIH, we helped launch initially the VTS-270 trial for that's the drug that is now being used for Bell and Abbey. In that period of time, we've had the opportunity to work with a lot of family advocacy groups and family foundations. As Kirk mentioned, I've worked with the National Niemann-Pick Disease Foundation, where I was chair of the Scientific Advisory Board for a number of years. I work with the Ara Parsegian Medical Research Foundation, which has been involved in NPC research for over 20 years and supporting that research, and also with a number of other smaller foundations such as Hide and Seek and DART and NPC SOAR. But for the last year or so, I've had the privilege of being able to work with the Andrews and to work with the Firefly Fund. Yeah, this is a tough one. I didn't have anything to drink either. So, and so this has been a great opportunity to be able to continue this work, and with the goal of really being able to develop, better therapies to be able to treat, the NPC kids. So what I want to do is just give you very briefly just a sense of some of the work that is going on and being supported by Firefly. So first, you heard about the VTS-270 protocol. The VTS-270 protocol is indeed in phase 3 testing, and patients that are in the trial are able to receive the drug provided by the company, and that works out very well. They're able to get transported to the centers like Dell where they need to receive the drug. But there are patients who, for whatever reason, couldn't qualify for the trial, or perhaps the trial came after they started, they needed to receive therapy, or ones that now have been diagnosed with the disease, but the trial is already fully enrolled. And for that, these patients have to go into what's called an expanded access protocol. In the expanded access protocol, which we sometimes refer to as compassionate use, means that the company will be able to provide the drug to the patients, and which is great, but there's still a lot of associated costs. The patients still have to get themselves to the medical centers, and there's only a few medical centers that are able to provide this this type of care. There's a lot of costs involved because this is not a simple drug to deliver. It's a procedure in order to be able to do that spinal tap and to deliver the drug. And so what Firefly can do is they can help subsidize these costs for families that do not have the ability to pay for this ongoing care. And in doing so, one of the benefits from the research side is that there are a lot of samples, a lot of biological specimens that are generated by these protocols. And particularly working with the investigators up at Rush Medical Center, we've been able to use these samples to be able to look for what we call biomarkers. These are markers of disease, and we're using these samples to be able to understand how we might better be able to monitor the effects of the therapy. So beyond that work in the sort of the patient realm, there has been a lot of activity in terms of being able to fund NPC research. And Firefly clearly has emerged as a major funder nationally. They've done this in partnership with a larger group of foundations, of family foundations called SOAR NPC, to support a core research collaborative of scientists, who I'll mention. And they've also taken the lead themselves in sponsoring really just cutting edge NPC research. And finally, they've also started an initiative which really has just been a tremendous, I think, real blessing to the community, which is being able to develop an NPC1 newborn screening strategy. We worked for a number of years and developed the actual test to be able to diagnose basically newborns just from the blood spots from their heel sticks. But I can tell you that the actual technology and doing the science and the discovery of the biomarker was much easier than trying to consider implementation of this test at a state level and at a national level. And so for that, we really needed to work in partnership. And you're going to hear about this actually from Allison, who's going to speak after me, that will tell you about the work that really began with Pam and with Allison and myself to be able to find a path forward so that we'd be able to finally get this test out there and eventually, we hope, on every newborn screening panel. What I'm going to focus on in the next couple slides is the work that Firefly has done focusing on the NPC research. And as I mentioned, this is done through a large research collaborative. My laboratory is located at Washington University, where I've been for the last 20 years. And my laboratory specializes in animal models, as well as using analytical techniques such as mass spectrometry to develop biomarkers. We've done this in collaboration with Steve Walkley at Einstein College of Medicine. Steve is really one of the foremost experts in understanding the effects of NPC1 disease in the brain. And Steve also is an expert with animal models as well. His laboratory was the one which actually did the initial studies with the one treatment that's approved, at least outside the United States. It's a drug called Zavesca or Miglustat, and his laboratory was the one that showed that it was effective, at least in the animal model. We also work very closely with Charles Veet at the University of Pennsylvania. Charles is also a veterinarian and an expert neuropathologist, and he maintains the only large animal model of NPC disease in the world. So it's a very, very important model that we work with in terms of testing the animals. And in the center, you can see Kristen Davidson, who is here. Kristen, can you stand up so we can see you? Yes, thank you. Kristen has really been our coordinator and has helped, sort of like the glue that helps hold this collaborative together, but she also is a very important person in terms of liaising with the family organizations, particularly with Firefly Fund, in order to be able to, basically communicate the work that we're doing. And Lisa Connell-Crowley, who you obviously know, Lisa also works with Kristen, and she's been invaluable in helping us think about what research leads that we should follow. So to give you just a sense, a flavor of some of the work that's been going on over the past year that has been funded by Firefly, first is that we're very excited about the possibility of doing gene therapy and actually correcting the defective gene. So there's a couple possible ways to do that. One way, which really seems to be gaining a lot of traction, is to use a virus, and this is called an adeno-associated virus. This virus can be engineered to have the normal copy of the NPC1 gene, and we can introduce this virus into the brain tissue, and it will basically distribute the normal copy of the NPC1 gene to all the cells in the brain. And when it does that, it's able to correct the problems that we have in NPC, particularly the cholesterol storage abnormalities, and able to save the neurons. This work, which we thought was really sort of science fiction for NPC1, perhaps even as short as 5 or 10 years ago, we now see that this really is potentially going to work. There is work that is going on at the NIH and at UPenn that are being supported by Firefly. Kristen's group at the NIH has really been one of the leading groups in the world in terms of making this NPC1 gene therapy a reality. And I can also tell you that we are in contact with a number of companies as well that have decided that NPC1 is a good therapeutic target, and they think that they can do the gene therapy and can develop a viable economic model to make it work. So we're working with them as well. Along with the gene therapy, we're also looking at possible ways to correct the defect in situ, which basically means going in and using probes that can find the defective region of the DNA and actually, enzymatically correct it in situ. Again, this is something that we really didn't envision, even just a short while ago, but the new advances in the CRISPR-Cas technology have really made this potentially a reality. And there are several sites that are now thinking about this possibility in NPC disease. One up in Toronto, funded by Firefly and the Toronto group. And there's also another group at UPenn as well, working with Charles V. An area that's been of great interest to us, and perhaps because of our work with the VTS-270, has been in the area of autophagy. And the best way I can describe this is that the autophagy is the process of recycling nutrients within the cell. And when you have a block in autophagy, you can't recycle these nutrients and the cell essentially gets sick. But you can also have situations where the autophagy is blocked because of an ongoing disease process, such as NPC. In an NPC, if you recall, the problem is the cholesterol accumulation. And that cholesterol accumulates in an organelle in the cell called the lysosome. And that lysosome is the key site for where autophagy is initiated in the cell. And so what we did learn from our studies of the VTS-270 drug is that there's a likelihood that it may be working in offering its benefit by stimulating autophagy and causing a turnover of all of that accumulated cholesterol. So VTS-270 is obviously, we think, a very exciting drug. We think it is effective based upon the trial results we've had so far. But I think we recognize as well that it's a challenging drug to deliver because it has to be given directly into the central nervous system. It has to, and to do that, we have to do the repeated spinal taps. It would be great if we could have a drug that would be able to do the same thing, but would be a much easier one to deliver, perhaps even in a daily pill. And for that, there are a number of candidates out there that we think may be very effective in stimulating autophagy. One is a sugar, another sugar, called trehalose. And this trehalose is being looked at in a number of other disorders where we know that autophagy is defective. And so that, we think, holds a lot of promise for potentially treating NPC. One of the regulators of autophagy is a complex called mTORC. And simply, we can say that we can now use drugs to very specifically target that complex in order to stimulate the autophagy. So these are exciting areas for us in terms of the research, and we're moving full steam ahead in terms of being able to examine this first in the animal models. As well as the autophagy inducers, we're also looking at novel forms of the cyclodextrins. The VTS-270 is a form of cyclodextrin. As I mentioned, we have to give it directly into the CNS, but it would be great if we could find let's say, versions of the cyclodextrins that we didn't have to give into the CNS, perhaps ones that we could just inject, parenterally through an intravenous route. And there are a number of laboratories that we are working with to help evaluate these new cyclodextrins and see if we can find some that may be able to even be useful for both peripheral and for treating the neurologic disease. And the last research area that I wanted to just mention to you was what I call proteostasis regulation. So when proteins get produced in the cell, they go through a quality control process. And if the proteins are not up to snuff, they get tagged as defective, and they go basically to the garbage can in the cell, and they get degraded. And it turns out this is something that's very, very common. We end up having to send a lot of defective proteins to basically get recycled. In some diseases like NPC1, one of the problems we have with the protein, that NPC1 protein, is that it gets misfolded and it doesn't get by the quality control checkpoints. So it doesn't get sent to the lysosome where it needs to function. So this is obviously a problem because of that. You can't get that NPC1 protein there. You accumulate the cholesterol and you have all of the untoward effects. So one of the things that we thought about a number of years ago was that perhaps we can basically help the cell in terms of its protein folding, and in terms of allowing the NPC1 protein, even though it's mutated, to be able to skip by these quality control checkpoints and get to the lysosome where it may still have function. And so we are looking at a number of different ways to be able to basically stimulate that process. Some involve using things we call protein chaperone inhibitors or activators. Basically, when a protein folds within the cell, it has a lot of machinery inside there that helps it get into the right conformation. And what we can do is use small molecules, drugs, to be able to accelerate that process and be able to get those proteins, out of the synthetic compartment. One of the exciting areas that has come out of the study of the NPC1 protein was the recognition that there is a specific protein in the endoplasmic reticulum, which is the synthetic compartment, which actually interacts with NPC1 and seems to be important in allowing the NPC1 protein to leave that compartment. It has not a very revealing name called TMEM97, but basically this protein is one that we had begun studying a number of years ago and felt that it really had promise as a target for NPC therapeutics. Now, it turns out that I got a call not that long ago from Steve Martin at UT Austin. And it turns out that the work that he had been doing with a collaborator at Harvard had actually identified a very important receptor that previously we had known about it, but we didn't know what its actual structure was. It was called the sigma-2 receptor. And when Steve and his collaborator identified this, it turned out it was TMEM97. So they had been working on this, and they had a lot of tools that they had developed in order to be able to manipulate this and to control the activity of the sigma-2 receptor. And so we began a collaboration which has now been funded by Firefly, and the work that we're doing now is to really screen through the compounds that Steve's lab and Jim's on. Is Jim here? Jim, can you just stand up? And Jim has basically been synthesizing these small molecules, these drugs that we are now screening in our laboratory, looking for potential activity in terms of stabilizing the NPC1 protein. So this is work that really cuts across a number of laboratories. And what I think that, what I hope that you get from seeing this group of collaborators and the work that's going on is understanding that this is a highly collaborative process. It's a process that really requires a lot of dedicated people, but it also requires funding. And that's where Firefly has really stepped in and has been able to help us take on these important but high risk, potentially high impact projects that we hope will eventually have an important impact in NPC disease. So thank you very much, and I look forward to continuing our work.
Thank you, Doctor. That's outstanding and really creates great hope. Next, I want to introduce Allison Rosen of 3D Communications in Washington, D.C. Allison is an award-winning communicator. She specializes in providing strategic communications, content development, and training services for healthcare organizations. Allison brings to 3D more than 2 decades of experience working in the private and public sectors, including a dozen years at a global healthcare agency where she advised major health companies, trade associations, universities, nonprofits, and foundations. She's a strategic counselor, communications coach, and messaging specialist. She's also earned a reputation for her approachable, creative, hands-on style that delivers results. In addition to assisting the Firefly Fund with their newborn screen initiative, she and Pam have been dear friends for over 25 years, and the Firefly Fund is very thrilled to have Allison on their team. So, I'm sorry?
I just wanted to say something.
Please.
I forgot that she's also a Texan, and she worked for Ann Richards.
Sure.
And that's how we met.
She, as a matter of fact, she worked in the Office of State Federal Relations for Governor Richards, and apparently has developed some technical skills because she's the one been running the dadgum computer the whole evening. So, ladies and gentlemen, Allison, thank you.
Remember when we had Texas statewide officials who were Democrats? Yeah.
You're going to be a downer.
Sorry. Well, I thank you, Senator Watson, and thank you, Pam and Chris. The video that we showed earlier today, I think, is a really great lead-in because you heard a little bit about the legacy that Pam and Chris want to leave to this community, and I'm so honored and thrilled that I get a chance to work with them on this NPC screening initiative. I can't go nearly as deep in the science as Dr. Ori, but I can talk to you about this public affairs and public health advocacy project, and I hope you'll get excited because it really was the Firefly Fund that really initiated it. So tonight, what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about is what is this about newborn screening? Why do we want to do it? What is the newborn screening working group? Let's talk about Firefly's leadership for that. We're going to talk about the members, the work that we've done together, what we learned from the research. We've only been working since last summer, but we've learned a lot. We have a bunch of latest activities, including some late-breaking news, which I'm super excited to share with this group since you've all been funding the Firefly Initiative, and we have some exciting news to share with you tonight. And I can talk a little bit about boring stuff, budget, timelines, and next steps. Okay, so why newborn screening? First of all, it's really essential to understand just how important newborn screening is, how critical piece of the public health infrastructure it is. Basically, newborn screening is a baby's first test. Dan described it a minute ago. The baby's born, they get a heel prick, and that little postcard gets sent off to a state lab, and that postcard is tested for a number of diseases of things like cystic fibrosis, and the opportunity to know earlier, to have a diagnosis at birth based on something that they find through that newborn screening process, and really make the difference between a lifelong struggle or a life filled with health. And so that's why we've really been so dedicated to trying to make this happen for NPC. And for rare diseases, newborn screening can do even more, because we can improve information about incidence, and we can short circuit that long journey that Dr. Ori talked about a moment ago, this long diagnostic odyssey that these families go through, wondering, they know there's something wrong, and it's so rare, and they can't put their finger on it, and there's nothing specific, and it can really help short circuit that process if you can know at birth. Big picture, newborn screening can really empower families. We can improve disease awareness, and we can increase the understanding of the impact of what it might mean to intervene earlier. So big picture, that's what newborn screening is all about. For NPC in particular, there are many other outcomes that newborn screening would support. We would have the chance to improve life not only for the babies who are living with NPC today, but also for the babies who are going to be born in the future with an NPC diagnosis ahead of them. And that's really where Pam and Chris have been focused, and why we've been so dedicated on trying to move this along so quickly. And if we're successful in actually implementing newborn screening across the country in the United States, there's a bunch of other benefits that we could see. We could be a model for newborn screening outside of the United States. We could increase and sustain the type of funding that we get from researchers and industry to think about and fund new treatments for NPC. We could have a better understanding about NPC1 as a disease state. Look, this isn't diabetes or heart disease. There aren't so many people that have this disease that we have this wealth of knowledge, although Dr. Ori probably has a wealth of knowledge, but there's not a lot of people who end up knowing a lot about this disease. And so if we have a better opportunity to understand more about the disease, it's going to be better. And again, we'll be able to advance these new and novel treatments. And because at the end of the day, this is about early intervention. Because as Pam and Chris will tell you, the opportunity to intervene earlier, and you can see it in their two children, one child who was diagnosed later and one child who was diagnosed earlier, and just the potential trajectory of those two children's lives. The possibility of intervening early is really what we're talking to the Firefly Fund about your support and why it matters so much. And you can see it every day when you look at their beautiful girls, Belle and Abby. But unfortunately today, NPC1 is absent from all newborn screening lists across the country. And that's what inspired the Firefly Fund to start this working group. They pulled together this cross-section of stakeholders that come from academia and industry and the nonprofit world to come together and figure out what was that path forward. How could we figure out this public health challenge to try to get NPC1 included on newborn screening tests. Look, we all came from very different backgrounds, but we had a common vision about what we wanted to accomplish with this working group. And that was to add NPC1 to the federal recommended uniform screening list. It's a mouthful. We call it the RUSP, and I'll talk about it a little bit more a little bit later. But the RUSP is really the sort of the governing body of conditions that are set forth at the federal level that states then look to and consider adopting when they do those heel pricks on the babies when they're born in the hospitals. And so after we achieve that, well, then we have a small task of getting every state across the country to adopt NPC1 and add it to their lists. So when we started, we really didn't know very much. We kind of knew where we wanted to be at the end, right? But we knew what we wanted is that we wanted to create this successful application to the Federal Advisory Committee. We wanted to have the right data and information to have NPC added to this recommended universal screening list, and we wanted to then launch a state-by-state campaign. That's what we knew. And so what we decided was that, well, we better start working in phases. And so we launched phase one, to research and scan the newborn screening environment. We sort of convened a working group, and we thought that, you know what, Pam said, we need a strategic plan. We need a strategic plan. Allison, can you write a strategic plan? I'm like, maybe, I don't know. And so we set out to that task. And then we thought that after we have the strategic plan, well, then we would move right into phase two, which would be, well, we're going to implement that strategic plan, and we're going to gather all the data, and we're going to submit it. We're going to have a successful application to the RUSP, which was, not unheard of. But what we realized is that in between, we were going to need a bridge period, which is really where we are right now. We needed some time to lay the groundwork to implement that strategic plan, identify funding sources, et cetera. And so the Firefly Fund continues to fund that work. So that gives you a sense of sort of why newborn screening and the initiation of the working group sparked by Firefly. So let me tell you a little bit about the approach, how we went about our work in phase one, and what we learned along the way. So we decided to establish two working groups. One that was focused on existing models, because there's other conditions that are on the RUSP, and there was no reason to recreate the wheel. We should learn from other people who had come before us. And then we also needed to do some work on the screening tool that Dr. Ori was just describing. We needed to do some validation. Was this the right tool to put out into the field for these tests? So the existing models, and we ended up assembling a group of key opinion leaders, experts out in the field, and we interviewed them for both streams of work. And they all were really, really generous and extraordinarily informative to sort of give us some guidance along the way. And for the existing models, we had a lot of questions. Like I said, we didn't exactly know how to get where we wanted to go. We just knew we wanted to get there. And so we asked the people who had gone down this path before, how many live births did we need to screen? How many positives did we need to find? Who were some partners at the federal and the state level we needed to talk to? What were some other stakeholders? How did you fund this? So a bunch of questions as we started. And we had a similar set of questions about the screening tool itself. What were the gaps and opportunities that we had with our tool? What were some of the technical aspects? How do we get it implemented at the lab? What were some potential partners, et cetera. So those are the two paths that we set down, and we also learned a little bit about what the criteria was for the federal panel, for the advisors of the HHS secretaries panel who actually makes the recommendations for that recommended screening list. And we learned about the criteria that they require in order to add a disorder to the RUSP. They needed to have the potential benefit, but needed to understand that there was in fact a benefit of routinely screening all newborn babies. They needed to be assured that public health labs across the United States would actually be able to implement the test. And they needed to have an understanding that if not now, in the very near future, there would be the availability of effective treatments. For example, if they were going to identify a baby who had a specific condition, was there something that the family and the parents could do? And so these were all criteria that we learned about for adding disorders to the RUSP. And then we also learned that there were some things that were, barriers, that were reasons why the committee would say no. The first is that, well, there wasn't a screening test that had been perfected, and there were no effective treatments. Well, from the NPC side, with the test that Dr. Ori described a moment ago, it's been published and validated, as well as being on the path from all of the treatments that he just reviewed for a potential treatment for NPC. We were feeling pretty good, but yeah, we got this. We're going to be able to get on that RUSP, no problem. And then, of course, we ran into what the barriers are. The first is that there are 6,800 known rare diseases, and the RUSP, it screens for 34. It lists 34. And once you get on the RUSP, then you got to go to all the states across the country, and they all have their own authority to decide which ones to put on the list. And guess what? Texas has 29.
Not proud.
For some reason, I don't know if it's Dr. Ori or the people who works in Missouri, it's 72, but the point is that the lists vary and they're not anywhere close to the type of coverage that we should have for the potential of making a difference in newborn screening. So that's a big challenge. Also, we heard when we went out to interview all of these experts that when it comes to public health in states, look, resources are limited. And we've got public health departments that are dealing with a lot of things that have really nothing at all to do with newborn screening or NPC. You know, they've got diabetes and obesity on their plates, and this would just be sort of one more thing that they would have to deal with. We also heard this comment that, well, you know, once we start screening for whatever the disease is, XYZ disease, we're going to have herds of families running to genetic centers, and we're going to be overburdened. And, you know, what we know from newborn screening is that newborn screening isn't causing NPC or causing a disease. What we're doing is we're giving the ability for these families and their families and their clinicians to know earlier and make better decisions earlier so we can actually have a better use of our healthcare dollars. And so that's really important for us to know that this is a feeling, but also for us to be able to combat that response. And as much as we hate to say it, because we're, as you know, really driven by Pam and Chris, who are very collaborative by nature, there's competition. There's as many as 35 other conditions right now that are in a similar stage as NPC1 who are out there in potentially phase 3 trials, who might also have a screen in development that might also want to be added to newborn screening lists. And just because it's worthy doesn't mean that it's going to be added. And so we're doing our part to be open and transparent with our process, but we understand that this is a piece of what we're sort of facing in our challenge and in our quest to get newborn screening for NPC. So all of that work and all of that talking to the researchers landed us on sort of four strategic paths that we want to pursue in parallel to gather the evidence that we need in order to make a successful application to the RUSP. The first was that we decided to prioritize the submission to the RUSP rather than going to the states first. We want to, collect the data that we need, which is really the second point. We need to launch a bunch of pilot sites so that we can collect an appropriate amount of data, screen enough babies, pressure test the test, identify some positive infants, help them work through the process, and show that we know how and what to do. Once a newborn is screened and tests positive for NPC, we're going to know what to do. For the NPC test itself, right now, it's somewhat of a standalone test, but because of that thing I was speaking about earlier where these labs are feeling overwhelmed, it's our next job to think about how to multiplex, think about it as bundling. How can we bundle this test with other tests so that the labs can feel more favorable towards adding it and so potentially not necessarily overwhelming or overburdening their lab and their technicians and their equipment. And then finally, we know we need to conduct some additional disease area research. As we keep saying, this is a rare disease and there's not a lot, we don't know enough about it. We don't know enough about when to treat, who to treat, what time to treat, what's going to be the best treatment. So there's a fair amount of disease area research that we're going to need to conduct. All of this towards making that successful application to the recommended universal screening panel. The other thing, one other final piece of information that I'll share is that as we are talking to these labs to try to get them to agree to take on NPC and help us conduct these pilot programs, is that we knew we needed to prove a couple of things about NPC. Bottom line, we needed to demonstrate that the time was right for adding NPC1 to newborn screening lists. So I'll just review some of these with you. First, that we had a rare genetic disease without easily identified symptoms at birth. Well, that's a check. There was an appropriate incidence for screening. Another check. That it causes significant morbidity and creates a major family impact, and that long diagnostic journey, which I mentioned, also Dr. Ori, and that's a check and a check and a check. That we have a fully validated test that identifies patients at birth, and that we've got a treatable disease. Check and check. And finally, that earlier intervention will lead to a public health benefit and that we have strong stakeholder support. So again, double check. So that's what we learned in our research phase and the path that we're on now. So now we're in this bridge period where we're trying to lay the groundwork to help us actually get to implementation. So what we're doing now is having these real-time conversations with potential pilot sites where they will run the lab, try to get us enough data so that we can make that application to the RUSP. The first is a program called Early Check. They're based in North Carolina. This is a research project in the state to do just what we're discussing. Take conditions that aren't already on the universal screening panel, test for them, see what the incidence is, how they can move any babies who are tested positively, and move them through the system of care, et cetera. This is a brand new initiative that came up, I don't know, 3 or 4 times during the interviews that we had, and they're launching in April. They anticipate screening about 45,000 births per year. The other program is in New York, which is another investigator initiative where there is 4 or 5 hospitals. 4 hospitals where they are actually screening a whole series of lysosomal storage disorders. NPC is one of them, but right now NPC 1 is not on the list. And so our goal is to work with the investigator there to get NPC added to the list. Right now, unfortunately, her program is on hold because she's awaiting renewed funding from NIH. So this is another potential opportunity where Firefly supporters and others might be able to help bridge the gap to make sure that program keeps running. We can get NPC added to the list, which would give us another 50 to 30,000 live births in a given year, a faster way to an application for the rest. Okay. So I mentioned I might have some exciting news to share with you tonight, and I'm really happy that I do. We have this late-breaking update. These have been real-time conversations with these labs, and so I'm really excited to tell you that Dr. Ori and I talked. Again, we had an initial call in January with Early Check, and we talked to them again on Monday. And what we heard was that they're in agreement. And it's really a bunch of collaborators. So Firefly, we've got sort of different categories. So the only way we'll be able to do that, plus all the other work that we need to get done, is if we bring and keep building our coalition. It's the patient and family organizations, it's the academic centers that we've heard about, and these industry and government partners. We need them all. We need you to keep giving, and so we're excited that we're continuing to build this coalition, and we thank you because unfortunately, it comes at a cost, so I'll just sort of go through it really quickly. So far, phase 1, phase 2, it's been about $103,000 worth of work. We're in this bridge period right now, but to do all of those things, those 4 strategies that I talked about before, those pilot sites, the disease area research, the work on the assay, is probably in excess of $1 million. And it'll be over a 2-year period. It's really important stuff, and we have to figure out a way to fund it. And this group, I'm sure, is going to be a big part of that. The timeline is a little detailed, but just to give you a sense that we're thinking about this kind of stuff, it goes from today all the way through 2020, and we're just thinking about how to chunk out the activities sort of quarter by quarter to make sure that we reach the goal. And that's it. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to now ask Pam and Chris if they'll come up and make a few closing comments. Ladies and gentlemen, Pam and Chris Andrews.
Hey y'all. I was really excited when we started to fund some research at the University of Texas, because I've always pictured the Neiman Pick as this villain in a movie, and I also thought it'd be really cool to turn to him and be like, "The eyes of Texas are upon you." I thought.
It was illegal. We couldn't do that.
Yeah, I know, trademark. I don't. One thing I've discovered in this journey is that I love scientists. I mean, I really love scientists. They're quirky, they're interesting people, they're naturally curious, they love to learn, And more importantly, in my case, they love to teach. But what I love most about them is their compassion. After Belle and Abby were diagnosed, there was about 3 months before the Parsigian conference was starting in was it June, and I couldn't wait to get there. I could not wait to get there. I was so happy because I walked into this room, bigger than this room, full of scientists, and I knew that every one of them had dedicated their career to curing NPC1. And it was overwhelming to see that many people. It made it real for me. And it was the first time since March 10th, 2016, I could breathe. It was the first time I felt any sort of comfort at all. But now I've become sort of this like science groupie. Like I get giddy and get all starstruck around them, and I'll sit in a lobby at a conference and I'll see like somebody come out and say, "Oh look, it's Dan Ori." He's like, that guy, he knows his way around a misfolded protein. Woo! You know, and I'll look, I'll say, "Oh, there's Marco Sedell. He works in autophagy." Ooh. You know, TFAB. So, you know, I like take the public. Could you sign this for me? You think I'm kidding, but I really do these things. It's like, you know how like I don't think they do it anymore, but like in the old days, kids used to get baseball cards, you know, and you collect them. I wanted to get some science cards, like with scientists on the front of them, with like their publications on the back, you know, and so like you could go up and you'd be like, "Ooh, Steve Walkley, 30-year vet." Albert Einstein, you know, or Kristen Davison, you know, gene therapy, Albert Einstein, and then trade them. Great. And I even had this like really strange. I thought I could start a fantasy league, right? And I could pick them all out, you know, and I could be like, I could have a draft, right? And I could be like, "Ooh, I'm going to take Jim Son. I'm going to take Jim Son in the first round. He's going to have a breakout season, right?" I'll think, "Ooh, this Johnson guy from Cal didn't do good last year. I'll save him for the third or fourth round. Be really cool." But you know, the problem I have is that I don't have a point system yet, so I don't know how, other than I randomly award them points as I feel about them that day. And oddly, no one wants to play with me. So it's a league of one. So I really love scientists, and all of them, every single one, everyone I've ever met. And they are and they will be, when all is said and done, they're going to be the heroes of this story someday. So it's a hard part, guys. Tonight, Pam and I want to end with gratitude, but we also want to give a little dose of reality. We want to give you an idea of where our passion comes from. We want to make it real, both the good and the bad. There's pivotal days that change your life. And some days you mourn, some days you celebrate. Of course, March 10th, 2016 is the day that we began this journey. February 28th, 2017 is the day we launched the fund. 1 year ago, today, we officially started to fight back. And I think as we've seen tonight, there's much to celebrate. But there are other pivotal days, some that are not so public. For me, that date is October 13th, 2017. On that day, I was in Los Angeles. I was standing at the bedside of a 21-year-old girl with NPC1. She could no longer walk, she could no longer talk or breathe on her own. Her hands and her feet were twisted with dystonia. She could not receive VTS 270 because scoliosis in her spine was so bad it was too dangerous to perform a lumbar puncture. She could only communicate with her parents by blinking her eyes. That's all that was left. She was an unusual case. She had actually been diagnosed shortly after birth, but At that time, 20 years ago, there were absolutely no treatment options. Zero, nothing. So her parents had been forced to watch their daughter decline bit by bit over the last 20 years. It's the death of 1,000 cuts. There was nothing they could do, literally nothing they could do. And their mother carries a picture of their daughter in her wallet at all times. It's a picture of her daughter as a happy, healthy 8-year-old girl with a big smile ear to ear. And she carries that picture so that when they go to the emergency room, which they do often, she says, she shows it to the treating nurses and the treating doctors. And she says to them, "This is my daughter. This is who you're treating. Not the broken body that's lying in front of you. You're treating my daughter, my little girl, and we love her." Earlier that same day, I went to a funeral for a 5-year-old girl who had passed away from NPC1. The little girl in her 5 years of life had not known even one single day without pain. Not one. But somehow, she had this incredible smile that would light up a room. I often wonder, where did she get that joy? She was incredible. I listened to her father, my friend, deliver the eulogy, and he screamed her name over and over again. Because he loved her name. And he could not think of a time when he wouldn't say it. So he kept saying it over and over again. His life had revolved around her for 5 years. She was everything to him. But suddenly, unexpectedly, she was gone. These two families are the bravest, strongest people you will ever meet. They are heroes. And not a single day passes that I don't think about them. And I'm not embarrassed to say that that night when I got to my hotel room, I sobbed uncontrollably. The injustice of it all, the cruelty, anger, frustration. It was also the day that I reaffirmed my vow, the day I reaffirmed the mission of the Firefly Fund. As long as there is breath in our bodies, Pam and I will fight to end this disease. Nothing, absolutely nothing, will stop us. We will not rely on hope. We will not count on miracles. We will do it. It's that simple. We will do it. The one thing that frustrates me is when I tell people our story and I tell them about the mission of the Firefly Fund, I can see it in their eyes. They certainly have sympathy, and that's appreciated. And they pray for us, and we love that. But I don't think they believe that we can cure this disease. They don't see it the way I see it. I want them to feel what I feel. I wish they would know what I know. I wish they could see the world through my eyes. Part of the reason we brought you here tonight is to show you that we have therapeutic options. We have multiple treatments on the horizon. We have brilliant minds working on this disease. Some of them are here in this room tonight. Excuse me. We have dedicated parents all over the country willing to do whatever it takes to save their children. We are funding and doing work that will cure this disease. One or all or some combination of what has been shown here tonight could end this disease, minimally making it chronic. It's not hope. It's not wishful thinking. It's real. It's not someday, it's now. It's here. But the only way it will be done is if we can continue to fund it. We, all of us, our tribe, must do whatever we can do. There can't be any half efforts. It's time to go all in.
When Chris sent me the talking points on Friday, I read them for the first time and I was sobbing at my computer. And then at the end he says, insert Pam. And there was a paragraph at the end. I was sobbing and I thought, how am I supposed to insert Pam after that? What I want to follow up with is that, on the fateful day that Belle and Abby were diagnosed in March of 2016 by Dr. Gibson with NPC, it was without a doubt, the worst day of our lives. We felt like the most unlucky parents in the world. And then 10 days later, when Abby was diagnosed, we felt like our lives were going to end. And we quickly learned that there were 7,000 rare diseases. And of the 6,900 and however many NPC was one of the diseases that researchers had been researching for decades. So as unlucky as we were very grateful to be 3 months later after our diagnosis in a room filled with researchers and scientists sitting shoulder to shoulder who had been working for decades to try and find a cure and additional treatments for NPC. And it was that trip, and my mom was on that trip, my sister was on that trip, Mary Ann Dwight was on that trip, Chris was on that trip, I was on that trip. It was like Austin had descended upon Tucson, and we were going to figure out how to cure NPC. And I left that conference, I went to the conference in a deep depression, thinking that my world was ending and that I was going to lose my entire family. And I left that conference with a lot of hope. And it wasn't just because the girls were in a clinical trial that was science-based, that was showing the efficacy and the safety that this medicine could slow the progression of the disease. That's not the only reason. It was also because Chris and I learned, after talking to several other investor groups, funders, foundations, what have you, I said, how can we make an impact? How can we make a difference? The Parsigians have done so much over the last 2 decades. They've laid the groundwork. We're so lucky to not be starting at ground zero. When you think about 7,000 rare diseases, 50% of them affect children. It's 1 in 10 persons have a rare disease, okay? Texas screens for 29 of them. There's a lot of us in here with rare diseases, and we don't know it. So, when I started to learn that, and I started to think about how are we really going to get the ball across the goal line for Coach Parsigian and the legacy that he began, I thought, and I was told by several people that we respect, was you've got to find a way to identify your patients and keep a list of your patients, or else nobody is ever going to want to invest and give you money to help cure your disease. So I said, okay, what needs to be done in order to get newborn screen on, the federal list and the state list? I've done complicated things. I worked on the CHIP bill, as Kirk knows, and we did an excellent job on that. I worked in healthcare for a long time on many complicated things. I thought, I do hard. It's fine. What needs to be done? And it's really complicated what needs to be done, and it's really expensive. But the difference is that if you can identify the patient at birth, the question then becomes when to treat, because there's different onsets. But then the discussion becomes between the parent and the doctor. And the parent and the doctor can decide based on the visceral symptoms or the neurological symptoms in the child when the best time is to treat. It's not Chris and I trying to figure out how come Belle broke her nose twice before she was 5? How come Belle shakes a little bit when she wakes up? How come her hands shake? You know, why does she have a swollen spleen? Just we were chasing our tails. So it is very important to Chris and I that we get newborn screening done, and we are going to do it with or without any of the other family charities or anybody else helping us. Firefly is going to get newborn screen done on the RUSP first, and then we're going state by state, and we are going to put them on the newborn screen list, because that will move the conversation about NPC into a completely different paradigm in the public health arena. And then we're going to start making a list of every baby that's born, and they believe that it is 10 times more prevalent?
At least 3 times more prevalent.
At least 3 times more prevalent in the children. So there's also an adult onset version. So we have made tremendous strides in the last year. You know, the Newborn Screening Coalition that Allison and I created last summer with Dr. Ori, thanks to the generosity of everybody in this room and some angel investors and a lot of people putting in a lot of hard work. We've come a long way, and we have a long way to go. So the newborn screening is important, and then we've got to start keeping a list of our patients, and that is really what my focus is. Chris and I have a dream. You've heard Chris say this before. He said it on the piece this morning. You know, someday a child will be born. A doctor will walk into the hospital room and talk to 2 new, overwhelmed with joy and flooded with feelings of love like never before parents. The doctor will sit on the mom's bedside, and for the first time in history, she will say to the mom, "I have the newborn screen test back from your baby, and it might sound upsetting, but I want you to know before I tell you the results that everything is going to be okay. Because of newborn screening, we have discovered that your baby has Niemann-Pick type C. But don't worry, we have a cure. And he or she is going to live a long life, and healthy life. And that is the day that we are fighting for. And that is the day that we will exhale and we will feel like the Firefly Fund has accomplished what we set out to accomplish. That is the day our mission is complete. Wherever the hospital room is, we will take a plane, a train, a bus, or a boat to go to that baby. We will walk in the room and hug the mom and dad tight and kiss that precious baby on his or her innocent head. We are fighting for that baby and the many that will come after that, because the truth is the gene is not going away. Chromosome 18 is not going away. It's just going to happen today, tomorrow, the next day, the next day. And we are fighting for those kids. So thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for being a part of our tribe. We love you all. And we're so grateful for each and every person in this room. Really. Thank you.